Good evening. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to one of the very important webinar that we are going to have shortly. And we have invited one of the leaders in this subject, Pamela Forward, as a guest speaker today. Typically, as we begin, we do a treaty acknowledgement. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, Dene people, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We all are treaty people, and we are promise-bound to work together in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation. The audience, this is one of the last webinars in 2024. Throughout this year, Conflict and Resilience Research Institute held almost 25 webinars on various topics. As you are aware, and those who have subscribed us in YouTube and Facebook, you are watching very important topics in local politics. In this series, this is why we thought it is important to talk about whistleblowing and what is the connection with foreign interference, because we have titled our talk today, Whistleblowing in Canada, Is It Safe and Why Care? And today we are also very happy and proud to have Dr. Maria Chung, Professor Emerita in University of Manitoba, and who is also our advisor. And she is going to lead the discussion as she is a lead expert in this topic. Without further ado, the audience, let me introduce our guest speaker today. Pamela Forward is President and Founding Director of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society, a graduate of Carleton University, where she did her BA in Political Science and Graduate Studies in Conflict Resolution, MA Legal Studies. Pamela has had a varied career in family and workplace mediation, business, healthcare, and government, both federal public service and advisor to federal cabinet ministers. Over the years, much of her work has been with people in conflict and crisis situations. As well, she has coached new mediators in Carleton University's Department of Law, Conflict Resolution Program, and law students in the University of Ottawa Department of Law. Pamela's experience includes both management and advisory positions at the national and international levels. She has been active in professional organizations, community organizations, and political organizations throughout her career, which included running as a candidate for a seat in Ontario's legislature. Her interest in whistleblowing advocacy began in the 1990s when she joined with others to support whistleblowers in the federal public service. Her in-depth qualitative case study on whistleblowing and drug safety issues at Health Canada, a federal department, was aimed at better understanding why reprisals occur. The study highlighted many system flaws resulting in reprisals against truth-tellers and impunity for wrongdoers. This blend of knowledge and experience has stimulated an abiding interest in supporting conflict-friendly, ethical, and accountable organizations and inspired the founding of Whistleblowing Canada Research Society. A native Newfoundlander, Pamela has traveled extensively, particularly in the Midland Forest, and has lived in Spain. Dear audience, our guest is admirably very well educated and well knowledgeable person on this topic, and this is why I think it is worth listening. So without delaying further, let me bring our advisor, Dr. Maria Chung, to the discussion, and she's going to connect our series, our topic today together, and then onward we'll listen to the presentation of Pamela Forward. Dr. Maria, floor is yours, ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you. Pamela, I would like to extend my warm welcome to you. I acknowledge the whistleblowing is a risky undertaking. Even in democratic countries, individuals can be marginalized for their whistleblowing actions. In authoritarian countries, it could lead to the loss of freedom. Some of you may remember the Chinese doctor and whistleblower, Dr. Li Wenliang, who issued an early warning about the deadly COVID-19 infections in Wuhan, China, only to be immediately being censored. Another vivid example just came out from the final report released yesterday by the U.S. House of Representatives Coronavirus Pandemic Committee on Oversight and Accountability. The report concluded that there was no evidence the COVID-19 virus had a natural origin and that it most likely emerged from the Wuhan laboratory. Alternative media outlets with substantial knowledge of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, such as the Epoch Times, acted as whistleblowers by investigating the virus origin at the start of the pandemic, tracing it to the level 4 lab in Wuhan, China. But they were blasted by Western media as a conspiracy theory and had their presence stripped from major social media platforms. Epoch Times. Some may frown your head when I mention this media, which is one of the few Chinese media outlets independent of the ruling party in the PRC. All these cases reveal that whistleblowers demonstrate immense courage and a strong sense of conscience. Like Pamela, they are brave souls who dare to stand against the tide sometimes. Welcome, Pamela, to our webinar tonight. The time is yours.
If you unmute, Pamela, thank you.
Here we go. Sorry. Thank you so much, Maria, for inviting me and Causer, and for the opportunity to talk about whistleblowing and the work of Whistleblowing Canada. Whistleblowing is indeed a very important topic in today's environment, as you have alluded to, Maria. As a matter of fact, it has been central to the functioning of democratic societies for millennia, from the time of the ancient Greeks, who called it parrhesia. Parrhesia is about speaking truth to power under the protection of the king, no matter how hard it might be for the king to hear that truth. It was considered a characteristic of a good citizen. So how then did we get from there to here, where those good citizens are marginalized and punished for telling the truth today? And that is what we are trying to better understand so that we can share that knowledge and hopefully get to a better place. So we agree with leaders around the world who say that education can change the world. So I do have a few slides to help guide my talk. Could I have slide 1, please? Fine, this is the topic for today. Whistleblowing in Canada, is it safe and why should we care? And this is what I will talk about. I'll say a little bit about who we are, the organization, the people. Then I'll talk a little bit about what is whistleblowing and why we should care. And next we'll look at what is it that encourages whistleblowing and what hinders it. And I hope there'll be time because there's so much to say, to talk a little bit about Whistleblowing Canada is doing and how we hope it might help. Next slide, please. So the organization, so we're a nonprofit registered charity with the purpose of advancing education on the whistleblowing phenomena through research and sharing that knowledge publicly. Our mission is to improve the practice of whistleblowing for the benefit of whistleblowers and Canadians at large, and openness and accountability in Canadian organizations. And we'll talk a little bit near the end about how we do that. So next then, who are the people? So our board and advisors, they come from all walks of life. There are academics, we have a former parliamentarian, there are former military people, and I say former because many of them are whistleblowers, and lost their jobs as a result. There are lawyers, there's a doctor, there are nurses, public servants, accountants, social workers, counselors, therapists. We even have a book publisher, a journalist, and there are business executives as well. And as I mentioned, many are whistleblowers, and some are married to whistleblowers. So what do we all have in common then? We have a deep concern for what is happening in our country and in democracies around the world, and how it is speeding up the disintegration of our democratic institutions. Really, what we are doing is we are working as hard as we can to preserve our democratic way of life and everything that we hold dear, truthfully. So next slide, please. I'm next going to talk a little bit about why Whistleblowing Canada was created, and that can be summed up in 3 words. It was sparked by failure, also success, and support and concern. So the first spark the failure part, I guess, the failure spark. In reality, Whistleblowing Canada Research Society was because my first attempt at forming such an organization failed. And that was 28 years ago in 1996 in Ottawa. I was instrumental, as Causer mentioned at the beginning, along with others, in establishing the Alliance for Public Accountability. And it was formed to support public servant whistleblowers at the time. And a major case was the resignation of a senior regulator from Health Canada concerned about unsafe prescription drugs getting on the market. The volunteer founders of the Alliance were advocating for legislative protection and were managing cases, which was extremely intense. And as I said, they were volunteers, very few resources, and so they were burned out within a few years, and there was no apparent support from the community at the time. And that could have been because we were here in Ottawa, which is the seat of government, and government was under great criticism at the time. But the lessons learned, they stayed with me. So then fast forward 15 years or so, when I graduated from Carleton University with a master in legal studies. And so this is the success spark that I'm going to talk about. So I did my thesis at the time on this same 1996 case from Health Canada. It was an in-depth case study aimed at trying to understand this upside-down whistleblowing phenomena of punishment for the truth teller and too often impunity for the wrongdoer. So I wanted to know more about why reprisals occur, as it seems so unfair to punish someone for telling the truth and doing their jobs with integrity. So the findings told us there were basically 4 reasons for reprisals: weak laws, dysfunctional organizational cultures and dysfunctional political cultures, and attitudes in the courts that were inimical to whistleblowers and seemed to use employer-friendly standards in judging cases. And the big surprise was we realized, and the academic literature told us, that if laws are introduced into an unwelcoming environment, they will not be properly upheld. Culture counts. So delving into the literature on the behavior of people in groups and looking more into culture helped me understand the why of reprisals. And I summarized that knowledge into a new theory to explain why dysfunctional cultures persist in organizations in spite of laws. The big insight for me one day was that while immersed in all of this, there was, I guess, what you would call an aha moment. I discovered the power of research to get at the truth, as I had discovered so much in court files and documents that nobody knew about, really. And when the truth is known, it can bring needed change. So then I found that, and the aha moment for me was adding research and education to support for whistleblowers seemed to be the recipe for another attempt at improving the very barren landscape for whistleblowing in Canada. So the last spark then was the support spark, and my next step was to talk about my idea with my thesis supervisor, Dr. Paloma Rago from the School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University. And not only did she support the idea, but she became one of our founding directors. So with this endorsement I was off and running, I approached people I knew and people I didn't know, and most of them agreed to join us. And while I'm happy that we're on our way, I am concerned that we are the only civil society organization that I'm aware of in Canada, a country of some 40 million people, looking at whistleblowing in a comprehensive way. That is, we're taking a holistic approach to whistleblowing. Others are looking at legislation only, which has not really been successful, not only in Canada, but around the world. Even in a country like the United States, which has had legislation for some 40 years. And we know this because we see on a regular basis that reprisals are still occurring. And I only need to mention the Boeing example. So culture must be addressed concurrently for improvements to take place. We've been trying here in Canada for 25 or 30 years now to have decent legislation protecting all workers with no success. We need to try something else. So then, if we could move to the next slide. So what is whistleblowing? So it's an act of disclosing information about something you believe is wrong. It's either illegal, unethical, some abuse of power that could be a threat to the public interest, to someone you think can do something about it. So why should we care about this? Well, as we mentioned, what is happening is something that seems wrong in itself. This phenomena of punishment for truth tellers and often impunity for wrongdoers. Governments around the world agree that whistleblowers are a reliable warning system for corruption, for fraud, regulatory failure, and other wrongdoing, and they help maintain honesty and accountability in organizations. They try to tell us the truth about what is really going on so we can participate effectively in decision-making as employees, as owners, leaders, and citizens, and help maintain standards. In fact, Canada does not protect whistleblowers, even though our country has signed on to many treaties saying just the opposite. In reality, only about 2% of workers are covered under legislation to purportedly protect whistleblowers, both federally and provincially, and they are public servants. And the legislation doesn't work. In fact, a study has told us it's tied for last place as the worst in the world. It has no best practices. And the one it did have to review the legislation, the federal legislation in 5 years, it simply didn't do. It refused to do it. So that means that 98% of workers in the private sector have no specific legislation to protect them. And that's not even mentioning some 13 million volunteers in the nonprofit sector. So the trend towards centralized power at the top and autocracy that is happening around the world is happening here too. And by not supporting whistleblowers, we're encouraging the growth of corruption and the legitimization of corruption in governments so that it becomes the norm. So protecting and empowering whistleblowers is really an urgent priority. And I'm going to give you some examples that I think will clearly demonstrate this. So if we can move next, please. So the first example is the 30-year-old national security breach. There's evidence that strongly suggests that today's election interference could have been mitigated or avoided altogether if whistleblowers had been heard and protected some 30 years ago. In the 1990s, approximately 1993, national security whistleblowers, public servants from then External Affairs, the RCMP, and CSIS were suppressed, ostracized, careers and health destroyed for just doing their jobs. They reported internally and eventually externally on corruption in the Canadian High Commission in Hong Kong, allowing Chinese triads, criminals, organized crime, to flow into Canada. The consequences have persisted until today and have grown to include what we believe can be linked to interference in Canada's elections by the CCP. The public servant who first initiated the disclosure was Brian McAdam. He died a few years ago and so was unable to see what is happening today. He simply reported to superiors at the Hong Kong High Commission in 1993, where he was posted what he observed. His computer was being hacked while he was looking at it. The criminal records of bad actors were disappearing from the screen in front of him. He was a senior immigration officer at the High Commission, and his job was to keep the bad guys out. This was witnessed by the RCMP officer attached to the High Commission at the time. He was in his office, and he saw it. An investigation ensued, as did the maltreatment of the whistleblower, and eventually those from RCMP and CSIS who helped with the investigation that culminated in a report called the Sidewinder Report, or Project Sidewinder. The investigation documented bribery, forgery of visas, and profiteering at the High Commission, which allowed members of Chinese triads to enter Canada and bring with them drug and human trafficking and related problems such as addictions, money laundering, and inflated housing prices. A former CSIS bureau chief testified at a House of Commons committee recently that every federal government over the past 30 years has been infiltrated by agents acting on behalf of China, and each one has chosen to ignore warnings about it. There's little doubt that the initial warning was that of Brian McAdam et al. In the 1990s. So there are some more in-between examples, I guess, from that time until today. That were exposed by whistleblowers. And I guess the first one we should mention is the Hogue inquiry into election interference. That would never have happened if it hadn't been for a whistleblower. And please note that the whistleblower from CSIS who exposed what was going on risked 14 years in jail if his identity or his or her identity is discovered. notwithstanding the fact that actually the Official Secrets Act, that's what it was called, now the Security of Information Act, while it does say if you breach secret or confidential information, you could end up with a 14-year jail term. It also has another part that says that there is protection if you can prove that you exposed something that was a threat to the public interest, which I think is interesting because nobody mentioned that when it first happened. The main thing was we got to find out who it is. They broke the law. And that seems to be an instinctive response. We've got to get them and put them in jail and destroy them without even trying to understand what and why it is that they took such a step. The other example, which is a big example, was the Cullen inquiry in BC into money laundering in casinos and real estate. Of course, we've all heard about the ArriveCan app scandal and the Canadian Border Services Agency. There's the We Charity scandal, all exposed by whistleblowers. The SNC Lavalin affair, bribing foreign officials, and political interference in the administration of justice, which saw 2 cabinet ministers lose their jobs for telling the truth. The current one, which has pretty well paralyzed Parliament, which people may not be aware of, is the Sustainable Technology Development Canada scandal, a Crown corporation with allegations of misuse of public funds. And there is the opposition is filibustering until the government and the public administration produce unredacted documents related to the affair. So the alleged amount of the apparently misappropriated funds, or the allegedly misappropriated funds, is around $400 million. Then there's, of course, the CRA scandal, where there were cybersecurity breaches that just came out recently of personal accounts and fraudulent tax refunds. And the last example still takes my breath away. Canadian Border Services Agency. It's almost a replica of the 30-year-old Hong Kong High Commission scenario, with the whistleblower telling all authorities, help. We believe the CBSA is being undermined from within. Passports from the lost, stolen, and fraudulent database are being destroyed on the orders of managers. The consequences of that, if it's not investigated, is that there are opportunities for bad actors to continue to infiltrate and roam Canada and around the world unhindered. And no authority was taking action, even though it was brought up by the whistleblower at a parliamentary committee over a year ago. They were all going to act, but suddenly everything stopped. And people who know about what is happening are speculating that it could be that most of the major parties were informed some years ago about what was going on, but declined to do anything. So if they do conduct what seems to be a warranted another inquiry into this, it seems that they'll probably all not look very good. So it seems they're in self-protection mode. So one last thing on this point of whistleblower case examples. There are a number of whistleblower cases where good, honest people have been struggling for many years to bring attention to their cases and have been ignored by authorities who should know better and who should be taking action. So we have then decided, if there is evidence, to allow these stories to be posted on our whistleblower blog, to try to bring attention to what appears to be perversions of justice. So if anybody is interested, they can look at our website. So next, please. I'd next like to consider what encourages and what hinders whistleblowing. So what encourages whistleblowing, and that is the big picture, is that we have a charter, a charter of human rights and freedoms. And that is the governing law that all laws in Canada must comply with. And I'm sorry to say that there is evidence that a lot of them probably don't, but that's another whistleblower story for another day. There is a video about it. We did a webinar of the whistleblower in that case from Justice Canada. But anyway, to continue with the sections of our Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, while it doesn't specifically mention whistleblowers, there are 4 sections which are pertinent for whistleblowing. The first one is Section 2B, that of freedom of expression. I should add, along with that, in terms of freedom of expression, there is this concern about the common law duty of loyalty to an employer. That's an age-old duty of loyalty. And in spite of the fact that a common law in England has made, on which our laws are based, made a decision over 160 years ago on that the common law imperative of the duty of loyalty is not breached if the discloser is disclosing, and they used an old word, iniquity, in other words, wrongdoing. So it seems that it takes an awful long time for a message to get through in Canada, because the first thing that happens is you hear these accusations of disloyalty when somebody speaks publicly. And actually the failure here is not that of the whistleblower, but the organization who has failed to deal with the disclosure, because most whistleblowers only go public when they've they've disclosed internally first and nothing has happened. So, so much for freedom of expression. Section 7 then, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. You can't just threaten to take away people's security. And Section 15 is the other one, equality under the law. You can't just treat people differently because they exposed wrongdoing, especially if their professional obligations tell them they must blow the whistle, like lawyers, doctors, nurses. Most professionals, they have regulatory bodies and professional standards. If they don't uphold them, and they don't report wrongdoing, they could lose their license to practice. And the final one then is Section 24. If rights or freedoms have been denied, one can go to court to ask for a remedy. No one is above the law if we are to continue to claim we are a rule of law country. However, what we sometimes forget is that we can't take these rights for granted. We need to fight for them, and to make sure that we're all abiding and living up to them. So then the other thing that is encouraging is the fact that we can share what we know. And the fact is, we do know why reprisals occur. We've discovered this through our research, building on the work of many others. This knowledge is not new. It just hasn't seeped into our consciousness enough so that it is put into action in our everyday lives. Reprisals are often driven by invisible forces that, such as perceived threats to one's ego, one's group or system. That happens whether one is innocent or guilty. You can understand it if one is guilty. They want to destroy the threat and discredit them and so on. But these forces, they propel us really to act instinctively to destroy that threat. Some other ones are this pressure to conform, another invisible force that we're all subjected to, but are often unaware of, and the obedience to authority, all embedded in cultures, both society and organizational. So we know how to develop safe speak-up cultures. We know leaders' roles in developing cultures in organizations and everybody else's role, and how all of these behaviors come together to form the behavioral world in an organization or the culture. And we also know how to resist unwanted forces, such as the one I've mentioned. We just need to commit to transforming and to aspire to doing better by using our modern human abilities, such as intellect, our ability to discern and use values, rather than to act only on our primitive instincts to destroy threats. There is new research also, which I think is encouraging, that tells us the what of reprisals. Two of our colleagues actually have written books on the matter. One of them has developed what she calls a checklist of whistleblower retaliation and the negative psychosocial impacts that victimized employees undergo. And this provides forensic testimony. Dr. Fraser's book is on the bullied brain, and it actually tells us that damage from reprisals can be seen on the brain on brain scan. So it actually damages the brain. And this can all be used actually in court cases to bolster claims, for damage and looking for claims for personal injury when one suffers reprisals. We haven't done much of that in Canada, and maybe we'll see more of it with this new information coming together. What hinders whistleblowing in Canada, as I mentioned them, poor legislation, political resistance, dysfunctional cultures, and so on. And just briefly, I'd like to mention the deep resistance in Canada at the political level. I don't know if people are aware that before the whistleblower protection law for federal public servants was passed in 2005 and implemented in 2007, the politicians were aware that law wouldn't work. And the reason they were aware was because Justice Gomery at the time, who was investigating the sponsorship scandal, told them so. It's in his report, and you can see it on the internet today. He said, it'll change nothing unless you, and he made a whole bunch of recommendations to amend it, which never happened. The other thing that is really shocking, actually, is the fact that in 2012, the one best practice to review the law to see if it was on track and needed amendment or not was disobeyed. That obligation was a statutory obligation in the law itself, and it's called disobeying a statute when you don't do it. And in Canada, that's criminal. It's for ordinary Canadians, disobeying a statute would be an indictable offense, with the possibility of up to 2 years in jail. However, it looks like political leaders seem to be above the law, no matter how much harm that might cause to whistleblowers and even to society in general, as we're seeing today. Then in 2017, another government set up a parliamentary committee, which they claimed was the statutory requirement, which it was not so because it was not independent. The statutory requirement called for an independent committee to review the law. The report again was ignored. It was a unanimous report by all parties of parliament. Nothing was done. And then in 2022, a task force was set up to review the law. Unfortunately, it was not really, there was not much confidence in it, as there was no lived experience on it, no whistleblowers, no whistleblowing leaders. The legal experts and the ethics experts, from what we could see, while they were experts in their field, we could find nothing that they'd written in the context of whistleblowing, and there were many former bureaucrats, so hardly impartial. Anyway, all of that is to say there's huge resistance to change. So next, please, and this is, I'll finalize with just telling you a little bit about what we're trying to do, which we hope will help. We held the first conference in 2022 on whistleblowing, bringing together academics, practitioners, whistleblowers. We are now in the process of trying to create a Canadian whistleblowing research network, because there has been little interest up until recently in investigating what is happening academically. It seems to be changing as the environment around us is becoming scarier. We conduct webinars. Thanks to the Law Foundation of Ontario, who believed us when we applied for a grant that whistleblowers were marginalized in Ontario. We surveyed Ontario lawyers, and the report has just been put on our website. Part of what spurred that was the fact that whistleblowers told us they couldn't find lawyers. So we now have a directory of lawyers on our website as well. We've also created short educational videos on legal rights. We've created a speakers bureau, and this is, I think, a really important thing, because we have 10 or 12 now. Our speakers bureau keeps growing. We're going to be developing courses and recording them and offering them to schools. The audience extends from youth in high schools and universities to leaders in companies and governments, for people in schools going into the workforce. We need to prepare them for the difference between learning ethics in the classroom versus what they're going to encounter in the workplace. Ethics in the workplace is a different thing. And for government leaders, they need to prepare themselves for creating safe, speak-up workplaces. And the last slide, please. I think there's one more. No, is that it? Yes, that's it. Sorry, it didn't look much different. Yes, we created videos on key topics such as trauma, culture, and non-disclosure agreements. They're on our website. We're planning for more on whistleblower stories. We've written op-eds on the need for legislation and culture change, both in the public and private sectors, and on the role of public servants as guardians of the rule of law and the public trust, which seems to have faded into the background a little bit, unfortunately. certainly at the senior levels. We've developed a toolbox for whistleblowers, which is really a self-help guide. And we have ongoing conversations with governments and other organizations such as international nonprofit whistleblower groups. And I will end there. And thank you very much. If there are questions, I'd be happy to respond.
Thank you, Pamela, very much. Now we will switch to question and answer session. And before I invite Dr. Maria to have the first question, I just wanted to add my recent reading of my favorite historian, Yuval Noah Harari's book, Nexus. It was released quite recently. And during my travel, I was reading it, and something struck when I was listening to Pamela's presentation. He mentioned in his book about the self-correcting mechanisms in a good society, in a good government. So this self-correcting mechanism, if it doesn't exist, then the society or the state becomes authoritarian. Then it becomes oppressive. And this self-correcting mechanism in every society or government does this check and balance, what Pamela was saying with regards to challenges of whistleblowing in Canada. Nonetheless, is really important to listen to the ideas that we shared today with our audience. So, Dr. Maria, I will let you ask the first question to Pamela. Go ahead.
Thank you, Kathleen. This is amazing, Pamela. We just amazed how Canada is being having that culture of not able to respond to whistleblowing very well. Like some of the cases that you mentioned has been going on for decades, right? Like the CCP's infiltration, the collaboration between the Triad Society, the CCP members, and local government officials in BC. They were so well documented by Sam Cooper in his book, Willful Blindness. So in your many years of watching this unfold, what do you see as the most important cultural change that you think we need to have in Canada?
Well, I think that people need to become more informed. We in Canada have had this habit of we don't vote for something, we vote against something. You know, we vote every 4 or 5 years, and we change governments because we're angry at the old government. And we figure, okay, we'll bring the new government in and they'll fix everything. But in fact, nothing really changes because the procedures and the processes are embedded in the organizations. What we need to happen as individuals, we need to become more self-aware and understand what happens inside ourselves when we feel threatened, these instincts that we have to destroy the threat. You know, this is remnants of our primitive cells when we used to live in caves. And actually, it helped us survive through the millennia. But now, as modern humans, we really need to take responsibility. You know, somebody said at one time, I don't remember who, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. So I realize that all of the things that I talked about this evening may be hard for a lot of people to hear, but truly, if you look, we see the disintegration of our democracy. Our parliament is not functioning properly when members of parliament can't stand up and represent their people truthfully. They're silenced by their leaders, and it's all in aid of protecting reputations and looking good. Same thing happens in organizations. We are pretending to be error-free administrations. Everybody makes errors. So whatever happened to accepting responsibility, saying sorry, making amends? Just look at what's happening in sports. And really, when you think about it, we live in a society that really sets us up for misbehavior. When you think about it, the culturally approved goal, the thing we all aim for, is economic success, right? And the other element is competition, right? We compete to win. Now, it used to be that we taught people to lose gratefully. You compete, you do your best, and if you lose gracefully. You say, well, thank you very much to your opponent or your rival. You were a good rival, and we'll continue on. But unfortunately, what we see today is the erosion of norms for legitimately achieving that economic success. So we win at all costs. And this is how our society functions. And when misbehavior occurs, lucky for us, there's some people who have conscience who will expose it. And that is, when we see whistleblowing and this whole process goes on, of trying to destroy the whistleblower. Well, I mean, if this continues, then we're simply going to self-destruct. It's all about money. This whole thing of opening up to China is all about money. It was, the idea, and I remember it at the time because I was in politics at the time. We have to open up to them. And, when they get to know us, they're going to love us. They're going to love, capitalism, democratic capitalism. And they're going to end up just like us. Well, in fact, just the opposite has happened. We're now seeing autocratic capitalism. So we have to accept responsibility that we're going to have to fight like hell to save our democracy. That's what the Americans are going to do. We can never stop. The Democratic Party is just keeping on fighting. They've got to try and preserve their country. We got to try and preserve ours. And that means each one of us has to accept responsibility to consider, to think about what we're doing, to be more involved, and to commit to being different and doing things differently. And I speak to not only leaders in organizations, but to also employees and, the subordinates, the so-called subordinates, who the leaders couldn't get along without. So I hesitate to use that word, but that's administrative words. They're more important than the leaders. Actually, without them, the leaders would have nobody to lead.
Thank you.
I don't know if that answers your question, but I truly believe, we have to critically analyze what we're doing, who we are as a society. First thing we can look at is elections and how we elect people. Is there a better way?
Very true. Thank you so much. We need to be able to tell the truth in a more easy way.
Yes, right. we have to facilitate this and to, really it's, somebody explained it once, it's like your car, it's really necessary to an organization to listen and to encourage people to speak up. Because in your car, right, you're running out of gas, little lights flash, something's not working, a little check this, check that. That's what it is. It's got to become the normal course of doing business.
Mhm. Absolutely. Pam, we are approaching 1 hour mark of our webinar. We are left with 5 minutes, but I wanted to ask one, I would say, short question. If you kindly, respond to this question. So this is about a comparative perspective. So how does Canada's approach to whistleblowing compare to that of other democracies like United States and European countries? And with special mention of the whistleblowing cases, very well known, Edward Snowden and Francis Hogan, and which are the cases of balancing national security versus public accountability. What is your take on this question?
Well, as I mentioned, so in terms of other countries and international laws, so legal experts have identified 20 best practices that make legislation protecting whistleblowers work. In fact, no country has the 20 best practices. I think we should be aiming for 20 best practices because our law is really useless. The provincial laws are the same. They've modeled on the federal law. They're full of loopholes. So the countries that have the most, and the biggest example is the US, they have 16 best practices. So you can see from that there's a huge gap. There was an attempt, and there's still an attempt to amend this law. It was a private member's bill brought forward a few years ago by a member of the Bloc Québécois. He was a newly elected MP, and it actually, the Canadian Border Services whistleblower I mentioned, he was the one who spoke about his case in Parliament. And we believe that's why the House of Commons voted unanimously for 8 new changes, to new amendments that would see 8 of those best practices in the law. But it's now in the Senate, and it may not get through. We expect, the government may fall at any time. And so here we will be again. But even 8 best practices make a substantial change, but not enough to make a real change, truly. The other is the European Union, the directive requiring all countries in the European Union to implement whistleblower laws. That was supposed to have been done, I think, at least 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of countries still haven't done it. They're slow, they're resisting. I guess people just like being able to do what they like whenever they want with impunity. Why not? And it's up to us to say, no, no, no. We're in a democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pamela. The audience, we would like to end with a positive note today. However, as you have heard from our guest, that this is essential in democracy, that we have that check and balance. Otherwise, what is the difference between an autocratic country and us, where rule of law is in full force? Our guest is an expert. She leads an organization, and it might be unbeknownst to many, those who have tuned in today, that this organization researches, brings experts together with regards to whistleblowing, which is, as again, saying that it's a mechanism of check and balance in our democracy. And today we are delighted to have all this information in an hour time frame, and it will be there in our YouTube channel in perpetuity as a knowledge with regards to this topic. And before I end, I typically once again go back to our guest and ask what would be her last thoughts today to our audience with regards to the environment that we are in our country. And she is very right saying that political resistance is basically, I think, whatever I have heard from her presentation today, is one of the most important barriers in whistleblowing in Canada, if that is what I take from her presentation. So, Pamela, what would be your last words to our audience with regards to the future of whistleblowing in Canada?
Well, we obviously have hope, or we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. We believe Canadians are well educated, they're well intentioned, and we're prepared to exchange and to tell people what we know. And we believe that we can, if we work together and support each other, support whistleblowers, that we can change things. I mean, it's only through the work of dedicated people that changes have occurred in the world, and sometimes it doesn't take a lot. So that's what gives us hope. So, and if people want to know a little bit more about our work, you can just look us up on the internet, whistleblowingcanada.com. It's very easy.
Thank you. Thank you once again. The audience, with this note, let us draw the curtain about our webinar tonight. And I am sure you are more knowledgeable about this subject. And please visit www.whistleblowingcanada.com, the website of Pamela's group, and you will find a wealth of resources about this topic. And if you personally would like to seek help, and Pamela says that there is a directory of lawyers they have created, and you can, I think, you can access help. So, and I would like to also end today's webinar by saying that Canada is a great country, no doubt, in comparison to others. However, we lack many things in order to be reaching the threshold of that rule of law. It's not utopia. It's not something that cannot be achieved. Pamela has shared that other countries have tried to achieve, that 16 best practices and so on and so forth. So through this webinar, it's a start, and it's a food for thought for many, those who are going through some kind of operation with regards to anything in the workplace or in their businesses and other activities, that you have some resources through Pamela's group, Whistleblowing Canada, so you can reach out to them and receive great support regarding your issues. So thank you very much, the audience. Please subscribe us and follow us in our social media channels. We will be broadcasting our last webinar of this year on 11th of December. And this is also a part of Foreign Interference series, supported and sponsored by our advisor, Dr. Maria Chung. So with this note, let's say goodbye. And once again, on behalf of the Institute, Pamela Forward, thank you so very much for taking and for enlightening us about this topic. And I'm sure there will be a renewed interest from our audience in the future.
Well, till then, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.